An arrogant sound engineer apprentice keeps sabotaging the setup, then vanishes during loadout. The crew drives 250 miles home without him, and the promoter's son has to be rescued by a 500-mile round trip. Stick around, because today's stories will leave you absolutely speechless. Story 1. The sound guy who thought he didn't need roadies. Alright, so this is one of those stories that makes you feel both furious and kind of vindicated, and I swear it all started with one kid's attitude. It was a weekend music festival job, nothing fancy. We had 4 crew members on the truck, and our boss also sent an apprentice along. The kid was the son of a local promoter, so everyone was basically being polite and thinking, cool, we'll train the next generation. Yeah, that lasted about 5 minutes. On the drive-in, he's bragging like he's already famous. He keeps saying he's a real sound engineer and that he can show us a few tricks. The way he said it, you could tell he thought the rest of us were just lucky to be standing near the gear. We get to the venue and start unloading. The truck is packed with heavy sound equipment, including multiple racks and generators, the kind of stuff that does not care about your confidence. It takes all of us to unload and stack everything safely, and the apprentice is supposed to be helping. First amp rack comes off the truck, and it's still around 80 kilos even though it's on wheels. The kid looks at it like it insulted him and goes, "I'm a sound engineer, not a box mover," then just walks off. We're like, okay. We keep working. About an hour later, the rig is stacked, strapped down, and we're running multicore and getting ready to wire the front of house and monitors. Then the genius reappears and asks what he can do, like he's doing us a favor by returning to the scene of the crime. I tell him, cool, help Hammer run speaker cables. He replies, I don't take orders from girls. Now, Hammer was not some delicate flower. She was short, built like a brick, and ran front of house like it was second nature. She was also our best engineer, and honestly you did not want to get on her bad side. She just smiles, the kind of smile that means trouble is brewing, and says, sure, you'll learn something useful. Then I go back to my cables while Boris and Chris handle the monitor side. A little later, I'm back near the stage and Hammer looks at me with this "you have got to be kidding me" expression. Turns out the apprentice had tried plugging stuff in again, even though everything was labeled, and he managed to mess up the amp rack wiring. I find him and tell him, very calmly, that if he's not sure, he needs to ask. That's how you avoid turning thousands of dollars of gear into a mistake. And he hits me with, I don't need to know all that. I'm a sound engineer. Hammer, standing right there, basically loses it. Not laughing at us, laughing at the sheer audacity of the kid. So we keep going. We're still setting up for the acts, and because we're professionals, we reuse channels between bands. Drums, bass, guitars stay in the same area. Vocals live in the last few channels. It's simple, consistent, and it matters later. The show routine is also straightforward. Boris and Chris run monitors. Hammer and I run front of house. We swap for each pair of acts so nobody's ears melt off by the end. We also assign the apprentice stage setup tasks, because we want him busy, learning, and out of our way. That plan lasts exactly 1 turnover. We finish the first act and aim to switch over in about 15 minutes. Incoming band sends mic requirements, we build the mic plot, and that gets loaded into the system. He comes back with a mic plot, walks off to help set up, and I start checking the channels. That's when I realize I cannot hear the vocal channels. I message Boris over the intercom and he can't hear them either. So he goes to the stage box. From out front I hear him shout, "No way." Then he comes back and says, "Do you know what that idiot did? He repatched all the vocal channels so the plugs were neatly lined up one after the other. That's not how audio works. That's how you ruin a show." Boris fixes it fast, we get rolling again, and for a while we're just trying to survive the weekend. Later, it's my second shift. I'm doing my best to keep him from touching anything important, but he keeps finding ways to interfere and then act like it's everyone else's problem. Then a jazz septet is up, and the kid shows up again asking when he can mix. I tell him he can mix the next act, under my supervision. It's an acoustic duo. 2 guitars, 2 vocals. Honestly, even a beginner should be able to handle that. Wrong. I set a reasonable baseline on the faders. He reaches for the master and adds another 15 decibels like he's trying to summon feedback demons. The system starts to wobble on the edge of howling, and I yank the mains back. Then he starts swinging EQ knobs like he's painting, and every change makes the sound worse. I shove him aside and bring it back under control. And look, I'm not even exaggerating when I say the rest of the weekend is a non-stop parade of mistakes, attitude, and little comments about how he's a better engineer than the rest of us. By the end, we're not just annoyed. We're done. So the event ends and it's time to strike the rig. That part is never fun, but it's the last stretch. 2 solid days of setup and show work has everyone wrecked. The last thing we want is more drama. We load the truck, and once again, the apprentice vanishes. We give him 15 minutes. Nothing. Then we spend 20 minutes searching the venue like we're in a horror movie, except it's just a grown man's bad decisions. We finally circle back to the truck around 3 a.m. and at the exact same moment, everyone just says, "Fuck him." We climbed aboard and drove the 250 miles back to the warehouse without him. The next afternoon, our boss calls me to ask why we'd left the apprentice behind. I tell him the short version: the disappearing acts, the repatching disasters, the attitude, the sabotage level confidence. He then tells me what happened next. The kid had to call his dad at 3 in the morning to come pick him up. That dad drove a 500-mile round trip. And the best part is what our boss says afterward. The dad told him, "I never liked that promoter anyway. He's always late paying after gigs. Next time he calls for a rig and crew, I'm telling him to go to hell." So yeah. The apprentice wanted to prove he didn't need anyone. He proved one thing really well. He didn't need a crew. He just needed a lesson in how consequences work. Story 2, he kept flashing me, so I hit him with the sun. It all started on my way home from work. Traffic was brutal, the kind where you creep forward, stop, then creep again, like you're stuck in a never-ending loop. I did what I always do in that situation. I backed off the car in front of me by about 75 feet so I could roll smoothly instead of getting dragged into the constant brake and go rhythm. Look, I'm not saying I'm a saint, but I was driving like an adult. Then this guy in an Acura rolled up behind me like he was personally offended by physics. He started tailgating, honking, and acting like I was the reason the freeway was blocked. At first I just laughed and turned my radio up, because whatever, right? But then he switched tactics. He began flashing his high beams, and not the gentle kind either. His headlights were those super aggressive LED setups, and because my car sits lower, his beams were already blasting into my mirrors. The first flash actually made my eyes sting. Like, real sting. I could feel spots in my vision for a second, and I remember thinking, okay, that's not normal. He waited about 10 seconds, honked again, then flashed me a second time. Then he did it a third time, and this one lasted way longer, like he wanted to punish me with light. That's when my patience finally snapped. In my head I'm going off, because what does he want? Me to teleport? Me to slam on the gas while everyone else is stuck? I watched him hold those beams on long enough for me to get a clear view of my passenger seat. And there it was. My handheld searchlight. The big one. The one that can turn a normal day into something that feels like a science experiment. I grabbed it, flicked it to the maximum setting, and I swear the air around me felt brighter. The flashlight has a heat sensor, so if it senses it's pointed down it dims to prevent overheating. But when you aim it straight out the back window, it goes full power. That max setting is so intense the battery can't even keep it there for long. It burns through power fast, and after a few minutes it automatically steps down to a lower level. But I didn't need minutes. I needed a message. So I aimed it directly out the rear window at his car. Before I hit the button, I revved my engine a little, mostly because my car is loud and I wanted him to notice immediately, like, oh, this is happening right now. The moment I turned it on, his headlights basically gave up. His car's auto system thought it was daytime, and the glare was so strong I could see him through his tinted windshield. He immediately started shielding his eyes and looking down like he couldn't figure out where the pain was coming from. He tried to adjust things, like flipping down a visor or reaching for something, but his hands were fumbling. All I could think was, buddy, you opened the wrong can. My brain went into that petty, chaotic mode where you're not proud of yourself, but you can't stop watching the consequences. After about 5 seconds, I shut it off. I didn't want to keep cooking him. The second the light stopped, he backed way off and changed lanes like he'd just learned a new rule of the road. Was what I did unsafe? Yeah. Was it probably illegal? Almost definitely. Was it warranted based on how he was wrecking my vision with repeated high beam assaults in stop-and-go traffic? Honestly, yes. The craziest part is I didn't even feel like I was trying to win. I just wanted him to understand what it feels like when someone decides your discomfort doesn't matter. So yeah, drive safe. Don't be the person who thinks flashing lights fixes traffic. Because sometimes the person you're targeting has a very different set of tools. Story 3. The bank financed the wrong land. It all started back in 1973, when my parents finally had enough money to build a small ranch house out in the country. The local bank approved the mortgage, shook hands, signed the paperwork, and basically told them, "You're good. Go build." Honestly, it should have felt like the happiest time of their lives. But then Bob showed up. Not the helpful contractor type. More like the guy who manages other people while he's busy overbooking himself all over town. So my parents watched weeks turn into months, and months turn into a non-stop cycle of demolition and redo. We're not talking about a crooked cabinet or some cosmetic mess. The architect missed a line on the blueprint, and the framing crew literally built a wall right through the bathtub. My mom was told not to put anything heavy in the kitchen cabinets because they were attached to drywall, not the studs, held up with nails that were basically held together by hope. And the garage door opening was framed into the living room, facing the wrong way, like someone built the house while staring at the driveway from a different planet. Meanwhile, my mom was a stay-at-home mom stuck in a nasty rental with 2 tiny kids, and my dad was working 2 jobs just to keep everything from falling apart. During all of this, the bank and Bob treated them like nuisances. They bullied my mom. They lied to my dad. My mom cried a lot, and my dad got depressed, which is not something you forget. Then came the final inspection. My parents met the bank representative outside and flat out refused to sign off. The bank had paid Bob a lot of money already, so the representative stormed to the front door, yanked the doorknob, and the whole door collapsed on him. Casing and all. The door had been wedged in place, not properly installed. So the bank called Bob. Eventually, Bob came himself to supervise the fix. Here's the problem, Bob wasn't any better at building than his crew. The house still wasn't right, and my parents still refused to sign. At that point, the bank started threatening foreclosure. And Bob turned around and threatened to sue my parents for breach of contract, because the bank wasn't paying him more. My parents were terrified. They had their down payment savings, and if this turned into a long court fight, there was a real chance the bank and Bob would steamroll them. So they hired an attorney. His name was Tom. He was kind, but my dad could tell they were cooked just by the look on Tom's face as he sifted through the documents. Then Tom smiled, like he'd just found a trapdoor. "Let's get everyone together," he told them. "Tomorrow." The meeting happened at the bank. Tom brought the bank representative, the bank's attorney, Bob, and Bob's attorney into the same room. And Tom did not waste a second. He stood there and said, "My clients have decided they no longer want this house. Please remove it." Everyone else laughed like Tom had lost his mind. "Remove it? Are you serious?" Tom, in this calm, theatrical move, put a deed on the table. He said, "Here's the situation. My clients own the land the house is sitting on outright. They don't want the house anymore. So remove the house from my client's land." Bob's attorney stared at the deed, then stared at Bob. And Bob just nodded like, "Yeah, that's the part you missed." Then the bank's attorney started yelling at the bank's representative. "You didn't finance the land that the house is sitting on?" The representative stammered, No. Tom didn't blink. He said, "Then you're trespassing on my client's land. I expect the house to be removed, the land returned to its original state, and I expect it immediately." My dad said he never forgot the blank looks that passed between the people across the table. Because sure, the bank could foreclose. But how do you foreclose on a house that won't exist by the end of the week? And the bank didn't even own the land. They couldn't recoup their money the way they were assuming. And Bob was in a nightmare. He'd already paid out a big chunk of his own money. Now he could be stuck tearing the whole thing down, removing it, and possibly eating the fact that the bank might come back asking for repayment of the initial money they'd given him. So suddenly, the tone changed fast. The bank and Bob went from bullying my parents to treating them like saints. It was like someone flipped a switch in the room. The house got brought into line with the original plans and specs immediately, and my parents didn't have to pay extra to fix it. Bob took the hit instead, and after all that chaos, he got the rest of the money and just about broke even. The bank representative got fired. And Tom, that attorney, got a story he could tell forever. A real "you thought you had them, but you wrote the contract wrong" kind of victory. Honestly, what makes this story stick with me is how brutal it was for my parents while it was happening. They were exhausted, scared, and running on down payment savings. Then one piece of paperwork flipped the entire power dynamic, And the people who caused the damage had to back off overnight. That's the part that feels wild. Not just that the house was a mess. It's that the bank and the contractor were so confident they could push my parents around that they never saw the land ownership problem coming until the deed hit the table. Story 4. I got you a souvenir. It all started in the summer of 1991, when I was broke and just trying to survive college. I got hired by the USPS as a casual carrier, basically a summer temp who filled in for full-time routes when people went on vacation. And let me tell you, the Postal Service wasn't just watching you. They were timing you, tracking you, and watching you like your route was a science experiment. Back then, it was way before GPS and smart devices, but the rules were still brutal. Carriers had delivery windows, and if you took too long, you could get disciplined. Even worse, supervisors and inspectors would quietly check whether you were actually working the whole time. The building itself was set up for it too, with weird back hallways and places where people could observe without you ever seeing them. I'm not a small guy. I was tall, strong, and fast, and I could haul a ridiculous amount of mail without slowing down. I learned the routes quickly, and I stayed friendly with a lot of the full-time carriers. I tried to be a good temp, not a problem, so naturally, I got assigned as the T6 coverage for a guy named Dave. He was a full-time carrier in his 40s, the kind of dude who looked like he failed gym class and never recovered. He had this smug attitude, terrible knockoff sunglasses, and an opinion about everything. And the main thing he had a talent for was picking on temps. Dave decided that since I was covering his 6th day, I should also be the one dealing with all the heavy stuff. Once a week, I'd get hit with the entire week's worth of bulky, heavy mail for his route. I confronted him about it, and he basically shrugged like I was whining. I went to my boss, and the message was simple: he's full-time, you're temporary, just deliver it. Even the postmaster told me not to overthink it. If the mail had to go out, it had to go out, and apparently I was making huge overtime, so they didn't care how hard it was. Dave did get talked to after I escalated, but the damage was already done. I was still carrying most of the pain on his route. Then I learned something important about how this place really worked. Some of the nicer full-time carriers pulled me aside early and told me what not to do. As a temp, I was supposed to take longer on their routes. Not because I was incapable, but because if I moved too fast, it made the full-time carriers look bad. It was a union shop, people said, and they didn't want management coming after them because a temp proved the route could be done faster. I'm pro-union, pro-labor, all that. But Dave wasn't just treating me unfairly. He was bullying a bunch of temps, and I was the one he picked to make an example out of. So I decided to stop sucking it up and start making the system work for me. I requested 2 extra mail bags, the big over-the-shoulder carrier satchels. When they asked why, I gave them a straight, official reason: I needed them so I wouldn't have to keep running back to reload my vehicle just to handle the heavy items. The postmaster approved it personally. After doing Dave's route a few times and getting comfortable, I changed my pace. I started running it. Like, actually jogging and sprinting between stops when I could, with multiple bags loaded for the segments. Dave's route usually took him about 4.5 hours on foot. I was finishing in 3 hours or less, day after day, rain or shine, even when there were magazines, samples, and packages stacked up. At first, nobody really connected the dots. I wasn't doing his route every day, so when I came back quickly and punched out, it didn't look suspicious. I'd grab other work and keep moving. The real chaos started when Dave took a 2-week vacation and I covered him 6 days in a row. Because I was handling the heavy mail the right way all week, there was no backlog dumping everything on me at once like it usually would. That meant I could stay efficient, keep running, and keep his route consistently under 3 hours. My best day was under 2.5. Then I get pulled aside by my supervisor and the postmaster after the first week. They asked about my timekeeping. I told them I was doing everything correctly, punching in and out, keeping the log straight. Then the postmaster started questioning Dave's route itself. He mentioned that I used to complain about the mail volume and that I'd taken much longer earlier in the summer, but now I was suddenly much faster. He asked if I was hiding mail, throwing anything away, or somehow falsifying deliveries, because that's the only way the numbers made sense. I got genuinely offended and told him I delivered every piece of mail every day. No tricks. No shortcuts. Then I dropped the real bomb. I told the postmaster I didn't understand why Dave's route was budgeted at 4.5 hours when it clearly could be done faster. I pointed out the route was heavy on dense housing, so you're not walking forever between stops. And I said some people seemed surprised I wasn't stopping for long chats or taking breaks like Dave always did. I made it sound like I was just trying to help the process. I ran the route again for the next 6 days, still finishing way quicker than Dave ever did. Dave didn't know any of it, because I wasn't telling him. When he came back from vacation, he actually tracked me down on his first day and asked how it felt doing all the hard work while he was gone. I told him I learned a lesson about how you treat coworkers. He laughed, went back to sorting mail, and then came back a few minutes later with a souvenir. He pulled out his middle finger and offered it like a gift. That was my last week at the USPS. I headed back to college, but I kept in touch with a couple people I worked with. And about 2 months after I left, I heard what happened. Dave got fired. The route audit showed a massive discrepancy between how long it took him and how long it took me. They reviewed his time and found he was taking unauthorized breaks, not doing the work he was supposed to do, and somehow he was also involved in something inappropriate with a woman on the route. All of it was apparently happening while he was clocked in. Meanwhile, my physical condition was the only advantage I had. I was just faster because I was actually working. Dave's regular T6 ended up getting most of the heavy mail dumped on her day, which kept her busy enough that she didn't get the same timing pressure. She later bid and got the route full-time after Dave was gone. So yeah. Dave thought he was handing me a souvenir. But the real souvenir was his job, getting shipped right out the door. Story 5. We had twins on the way, then our neighbors got raided. It all started about a year before this happened, when my wife and I found out we weren't having one baby. We were having 2. So we did what any sane couple would do. We stopped thinking about eventually and started looking for a real house with actual space. At the time, we were stuck in a 1-bedroom studio on the ground floor, and the only way out was this metal fire escape staircase. Not exactly ideal when you're pregnant, sleep deprived, and trying to survive the 3rd trimester. We found a freshly renovated place, plenty of room, and a big garden. We signed the lease, grabbed the keys immediately, and moved in fast. The day the landlord drove off, my neighbor next door rolled up like she owned the sidewalk and started laying down rules. No noise before noon. No this, no that. Her boyfriend worked nights, so he needed to sleep. Honestly, it was so many do not instructions right away that I already knew trouble was coming. So we played nice. The house was brand new, so we tried to keep things quiet until afternoon. We weren't trying to fight anyone. We were just trying to build a life. And for a moment, it felt like we might have gotten lucky. The whole street seemed warm, people offered help, and when my wife was almost due, folks actually showed up with kindness instead of chaos. But then we heard who lived next door. Nobody liked them. He was a bully, always starting arguments with whoever was nearby. And on top of that, they were known for illegal radio stuff. Like, not just loud music, but actual pirate broadcasting, blasting whatever they wanted, including these brutal tracks that sounded like they were designed to ruin your nervous system. They'd party Thursday through Sunday until around 5 in the morning. Loud music, yelling, drunken chaos. The kind of lifestyle that makes you wonder what inside voices even means. And I'm sitting there thinking, perfect. 2 newborns on the way, and we're about to live next to a human-shaped disaster. The partying didn't even wait. The second we moved in, they went full volume. And it was hilarious in the worst way, because she wanted us to be quiet for her boyfriend's sleep, while her boyfriend and their crew treated the neighborhood like it was their personal club. Then one day my father-in-law came over to lay new grass. He parked a trailer behind our houses, in what seemed like a normal public spot. Within minutes, the neighbor stormed over acting like the ground itself was his property. He told my Phil to move the trailer. Not a request. An order. I told him no. I'm not walking around a house carrying heavy sod for some grown man's ego. He lost it immediately. Started yelling. Started acting like he owned our yard, our time, and our peace. My Phil and I kept working. End of the day comes, my Phil hooks up the trailer to leave, and that neighbor shows up again, screaming at him, threatening him, and basically trying to intimidate everyone in sight. Here's the part I need you to understand. You can mess with me all day, I can handle it. But the second you threaten my family, that's where I draw the line. I ran outside and told him to back off. I'm not going to pretend I'm some trained fighter, but I do have a temper, and I can be convincing when I'm angry. He backed off, and my Phil left. Then I went inside and found my wife crying. She was scared he'd escalate. Scared he'd target her father, or worse, target me. And with pregnancy hormones already doing their thing, I was furious in a way that felt bigger than anger. It was like my body was already bracing for the next hit. I promised her I wouldn't do anything stupid. Not yet. Time passed. Nothing major happened for a while. Until my wife went into labor. And it was not smooth. We ended up needing a C-section because one of our daughters was in danger. The umbilical cord nearly strangled her. Those nights in the hospital were brutal. Pain, fear, exhaustion, the whole thing. We stayed 3 nights and finally got to go home. Family had already put up this huge welcome sign in the front yard for the twins. It had been there for days before we arrived, so the neighbors definitely knew we were coming. So you'd think they'd act decent, right? New parents, newborns, recovering mother. Nope. That first night, they started partying again. Full blast. Right from noon, blasting their terror music until 5 or 6 in the morning. And it didn't stop just that week. It went on and on like it was their full-time job. We barely slept. Our daughter had terrible cramps, and when you combine that with constant noise and exhausted parents who are at the end of their patience, the crying turns into a daily nightmare. That's when I snapped. I started researching pirate radio laws, rules, regulations, and what could actually be done about it. Then I focused on their backyard antenna. It was massive, way too tall, and it wasn't legal. Not only that, it looked like they had all the gear needed to broadcast illegally. I didn't immediately report them. I was trying to protect my family first. We were already looking for another place to lease, because I didn't want my wife and the babies stuck here alone during the day. Some of you might wonder, why not involve the police? We did call them once. And I still can't believe what happened. They basically showed up and told the neighbors we called about noise complaints. No protection, no privacy, no follow-up. Just straight up, yeah, it's them. So now the neighbor was even angrier. The next day he yelled over the fence that we shouldn't do that again, like a threat dressed up as advice. I told the police about it too, but without witnesses, nothing moved. So I had to get smarter. A few days later, I walked out the front door and he was stepping out of his car like he was waiting for me. He demanded I cut back the ivy that grew on our side and tangled with his antenna. He said he'd be gone for hours, and I could come into his garden to do it. At first, I thought, great, another power move. But then I realized this was my opening. I agreed to do it immediately, because now I could get close enough to figure out what exact equipment he had, where the cables ran, what kind of setup he was running, and I could take photos. That was the icing on the cake. By the time we finished, we had enough evidence to make a real report. We had already signed a lease for a new place, so we'd be out in about 2 weeks. I spent that night figuring out the proper channels to report illegal broadcasting. I called the telecom agency and also the police. The police part made me nervous, because I didn't want another situation where someone told the neighbors it was us. So I reached out to a nephew who works for the police. His official area is different, but he knew enough people to help without tipping off the neighbors. I needed safety more than pride. I handed over everything, what I documented, where to listen on the frequencies, and the evidence we gathered. They started a neighborhood investigation, not because it was necessary, but because it helps cover logistics and keeps the whole thing from looking like it was personally targeted. Then we asked them to wait to raid until after we moved. They did. 2 weeks later, we moved out. And just 2 days after we were gone, they raided the neighbor. Everything got seized. Radios, computers, phones, the whole setup. Even his car. He left in handcuffs. His girlfriend or partner tried to cause a scene and interfere, and that was apparently loud enough to get reported to me by an ex-neighbor who was just as relieved as we were. Later, I learned this wasn't even his first time getting caught. It was his third. On top of the illegal broadcasting, his car had no insurance and failed the inspection. The cops had been watching him for a week, and that meant they saw him driving it while it was not legal. He got fined around 30,000 euros, did about 12 weeks in jail, and a bunch of his seized equipment got destroyed. His girlfriend did community service for over 40 hours. They were forced to sell the house. And the best part is what happened to the neighborhood's mood. People who had been stuck dealing with the noise and chaos finally got their peace back. Now look, I'm not proud of being the kind of person who fights dirty. But the truth is, they pushed and pushed and pushed until it stopped being about noise and started being about threats, intimidation, and endangering our family's safety. Over a year later, I ran into them at a grocery store. They looked at me like I was something they couldn't swallow. But after everything that happened, I didn't need revenge fantasies. The raiding, the seizures, the consequences, The quiet neighborhood again. That was the real payoff, and honestly, I'm just grateful we got our life back. The weird part is, the whole nightmare turned into something better, because it ended. And sometimes that's the only victory that matters. That's all for today. Which story was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and like the video for more insane stories from DT Audio.